Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast. Today's episode is dedicated to the introduction to Hamlet, where we'll be asking the question, where does Hamlet come from? The obvious answer is that Hamlet comes from Denmark. The play is called Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, and we'll be talking about that a little more in this episode. But where does Hamlet really come from? Well, it really comes from the end of the 1590s. At that time, Shakespeare was a well-known and popular playwright. His comedies were successful, and his history plays were a great hit. The character of Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1 and 2 was so popular that the Queen herself, Queen Elizabeth, asked him to revive the character for another play, which of course Shakespeare did in The Merry Wives of Windsor. But Shakespeare wasn't famous for writing tragedies, far from it. The closest he'd come was that he'd written a political thriller called Julius Caesar. But in the late 1590s, there was a huge vogue and a fashion for revenge tragedies, and it was fueled by the success of another playwright called Thomas Kyd, whose play, The Spanish Tragedy, had been written in the 1580s, was revived in 1597, and it had proved to be an enormous hit. And since Shakespeare was basically the writer-in-residence of the company that he worked with, they turned to Shakespeare and asked him to write a revenge tragedy that they could perform. The formula for revenge tragedies is pretty straightforward. At the beginning of the play, something bad happens to our hero. In the middle of the play, he goes through a number of trials before at the end of the play he gets his revenge. But of course he has to die in the process of getting his revenge. That's because although revenge was enormously popular during Shakespeare's time, our hero has to die because revenge is morally repugnant to Christians. The Christian way is forgiveness and turning the other cheek. Unfortunately, forgiveness and turning the other cheek isn't very dramatic. But revenge means that our hero has to pay, quote unquote, for his revenge with his life. Revenge, it has been said, was very popular to Elizabethan audiences because at that time the justice system was far from honest and transparent, and revenge tragedies appealed to Elizabethan audiences' natural sense of justice. On the other hand, revenge is still popular today. You yourself have seen a million different revenge stories at the movies, from Bruce Lee to Steven Seagal to Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill and Django Unchained. The John Wick series of movies, starring Keanu Reeves, features a former hitman seeking revenge for the theft of his car and the murder of his dog. Revenge remains enormously popular even today. In Shakespeare's time, the revenge tragedy had some conventions that we see in most of these plays. First of all, there's a lot of violence. Audiences like violence. In Hamlet, there's a murder before the play begins. That's Hamlet's father. Polonius is murdered by Hamlet. Ophelia dies by drowning. And in the final scene, Gertrude, Claudius, Laertes and Hamlet all die. Now, if you add to that the fact that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern presumably die off stage because of Hamlet's letter to the King of England, and also that what's left of the jester Yorick turns up in Act 5, Scene 1, we can see that Shakespeare follows this convention wholeheartedly. Secondly, there is almost always a ghost or some supernatural element in these plays. Ghosts were popular in the theatre at this time. Then again, ghosts are still popular. There's a ghost in Hamlet, there's another one in Macbeth, and there's a ghost in Thomas Kyd's Spanish Tragedy. Thirdly, there is a play within a play, what's called meta-theatricality. The play within a play is normally used in a revenge tragedy to try and catch out the murderer. In Hamlet, the play within the play appears in Act 3, Scene 2, and Claudius's reaction to the play gives Hamlet the proof he needs of Claudius's guilt. In many revenge tragedies, just as an aside, there's also cannibalism, which does not turn up in Hamlet, thank goodness, but is apparent in one of Shakespeare's earlier plays called Titus Andronicus. Like I said, these revenge tragedies had a simple formula. Bad things happen to our hero, there's a bit in the middle, and our hero gets his revenge in the end, but has to die getting his revenge. The problem with this formula, if you're a playwright, was to do with the bit in the middle. During Shakespeare's time, audiences were famously rowdy. They were nothing like the theatre audiences of today. Think of them more like a football crowd at a football match, rather than as a theatre audience. They were not quiet, they were noisy, they shouted, and we know that if the audience got bored with the play, they threw rotten vegetables at the actors. We also know of instances where fights broke out in the audience and the play on stage had to stop until order was restored so that the play could carry on. Losing the interest of the audience had serious repercussions in Shakespeare's time, and that's why Shakespeare goes to such great lengths to engage the audience. Since there's nothing happening in the middle of a revenge tragedy, most playwrights try to cover up the fact by having our hero distracted by interesting events, or things that happen to him, or activities that he has to take up, trials he must win over. In Hamlet, Shakespeare does the exact opposite. The bit at the beginning where something bad happens to our hero, in Hamlet, has already happened before the play begins. Hamlet's father is murdered before the play, and we hear about it from the ghost of Hamlet's father, although as the audience we know that something bad is happening right from the start. Hamlet's decision as to what he should do about this makes up the middle bit of the play. Hamlet's still thinking about it in Act 3, when he stages the play within a play to watch Claudius's reaction. The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. In Act 4, Scene 3, Hamlet is sent to England, and his escape from Claudius's plot to kill him, which is what it is, leads us directly into the resolution of the play, Claudius's death, and Hamlet's own demise. And now a short note on the opening of Hamlet. Many plays during Shakespeare's time started with a procession, because a procession meant music. And as I said earlier, the audience at this time were famously rowdy. And the music that came with the procession was a way of signalling that the play was about to begin and the audience needed to quieten down. Shakespeare starts Hamlet with a soldier on watch late at night on the battlements of Elsinore Castle, which is where most of the action of the play takes place. The soldier is nervous as his friend arrives. Bernardo is there to relieve Francesco of his duties. Horatio and Marcellus enter, and Francesco leaves. Bernardo, Horatio and Marcellus then have a chat about a ghost that's been appearing. And Horatio is there to see the ghost for himself. Guess what? The ghost shows up, and Marcellus says to Horatio, "Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio." The point is that Horatio is educated, and therefore he can speak Latin. Since Latin is the language of the church, the soldiers assume that he'll be able to communicate with a supernatural entity like a ghost. They've tried to talk to the ghost and got no response. They think maybe that's because the ghost, being dead, probably speaks Latin like the parish priest does. Horatio tries to talk to the ghost, but it leaves. Horatio, an educated and rational man, says, basically, "Well, blow me down with a feather, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes." No, he doesn't. What he actually says is, "Before my God, I might not this believe, without the sensible and true avouch of mine own eyes." which basically is the same thing. The ghost looks like the king, especially in his armour, which, funny when you think about it, because the king won a battle against Fortinbras, king of Norway, and won a load of land with it, and now young Fortinbras, his heir, would like the land back, and appears to be getting ready for war, which is why the soldiers are on watch in the first place. So Bernardo thinks the political trouble might be the reason for the ghost's appearance. Does the ghost know what will happen in a future war? The ghost comes back. They try to force it to speak, but it disappears as the dawn approaches. Horatio says, let's go and tell young Hamlet that his dead dad is wandering about the battlements. They don't know what the ghost is doing and why it's there, and neither do we as the audience. Then, after seeing a ghost, then we get the procession and the music, which tells the audience that the play is about to begin. So in other words, the whole thing with the ghost could easily catch the audience off guard. That's the point. It's different. It's strange, just like the play is. In a sense, Shakespeare is giving us a recap of what happened before the play began. It's like a taster. Previously on Downton Abbey, previously on Hamlet, there's a ghost wandering around the battlements, and now the play begins with a procession and with music. And so we go from a scene late at night on the battlements of Elsinore Castle with a ghost to a scene in daylight at a wedding. There's a procession, there's music and people dressed up in wedding outfits, and King Claudius, he's the guy wearing the crown, makes a speech which points out that his dear brother has just died, and here he is marrying his dead brother's wife, his ex-sister-in-law. Claudius is aware that the marriage is very sudden and not very long after his brother's death, but, says Claudius, there is a threat to the state of Denmark in the shape of young Fortinbras of Norway, who wants the land back that his father lost to old King Hamlet, who we know is now deceased and wandering around the battlements late at night. For Shakespeare's audience, this is a very bad situation. Firstly, because ghosts don't just start appearing for no reason, and secondly, the church strictly forbids anyone from marrying their sister-in-law. Shakespeare's audience would have been aware that in the New Testament of the Bible, Herod marries his sister-in-law, is denounced for it by John the Baptist, which eventually, of course, causes John the Baptist to have his head cut off. He is a king with a crown on his head, his brother's ghost is wandering about the battlements, and he's married to, quote, our sometime sister, now our queen. Things are very bad in Denmark. How bad? Well, you'll have to keep watching. The interesting thing is that at this point, we haven't actually met Hamlet yet. We don't know what he's like. We don't know how he's going to react. We do know, as the audience, that old King Fortinbras of Norway died, and his son, young Fortinbras, became king. But then old King Hamlet died, and his brother Claudius has become king, rather than young Hamlet. Which brings us back to the title of the play, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Why is Hamlet only the prince? Why isn't Hamlet the king? Well, what we do know is that young Hamlet's in a tight spot. And like I said, we haven't even met him yet. Do we want to know what young Hamlet's like? What he's going to do? Well, we'll have to keep on watching. So that's just a short introduction to the play Hamlet. Did you enjoy this podcast? Not sure? Bit like Hamlet, you're not sure if you enjoyed it at all? Do you want to press the like button? What would happen if you subscribed? And what would happen after you've subscribed? To listen, to like, to subscribe. But what dreams may come when we have subscribed to this Shakespeare podcast? Okay, just think about it and get back to me in Act 5.